She collapsed beside her mother's coffin, weeping so hard she could barely breathe. The mourners watched in silence. Then her husband spoke, cold and deliberate. "Let's be clear. Her mother died and left her buried in debt. That's her inheritance." His mother stepped forward, laughing. "Imagine spending your whole life poor and leaving your daughter even poorer." His sister filmed it, grinning. "This is the saddest funeral I've ever seen." They mocked her, humiliated her, turned sacred grief into a spectacle. But hidden in her coat pocket was a letter that would change everything. And in less than 24 hours, the people laughing at her funeral would be the ones begging for mercy. Before we dive into the story, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment with the time you're watching right now. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now let's begin. The chapel was supposed to be sacred. It was supposed to be a place where grief was honored, where silence held weight, where the dead were remembered with dignity. But today, it has become something else entirely. A stage, a battlefield, a place where cruelty wore expensive perfume and designer suits. Neria Hale stood motionless beside her mother's coffin, her fingers gripping the edge of the polished wood so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Not here. Not in front of them. Around her, the Ashford family circulated like sharks, their laughter sharp and deliberate, their voices raised just loud enough to make sure she heard every word. Evelyn Ashford, her mother-in-law, stood near the front of the room, holding a glass of champagne, as if this were a cocktail party, and not a funeral. Her silk dress probably cost more than Neria's mother had earned in a year. She tilted her head back and laughed, a sound that echoed off the chapel walls like shattering glass. "I mean, honestly," Evelyn said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "did anyone actually expect she left anything behind?" The woman spent her entire life scrubbing hospital floors and selling food on street corners. What kind of legacy is that? The words hit Neria like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on her mother's face, pale and still beneath the glass. The woman who had carried the pregnancy alone, who had walked miles in the rain so Neria could take the bus, who had sold her wedding ring to pay for Neria's school books, who had worked herself to exhaustion every single day so her daughter would never feel abandoned. And now, at her funeral, they laughed at her. Miranda, Caleb's younger sister, leaned against one of the pews with her phone in her hand, recording everything. "Mom, you're terrible," she said, grinning. "But you're not wrong. I mean, what did she even do with her life? Nothing." Gregory, one of Caleb's cousins, chimed in from across the room. "Exactly. She probably died in debt. I bet Neria's expecting us to pay for this whole thing." More laughter. More phones lifting to capture the moment. Neria felt her stomach twist, but she kept her face blank. She had learned a long time ago how to hide, how to disappear even when she was standing right in front of them. It was a survival skill her mother had taught her. "Silence is armor," her mother used to say. "Let them think you're weak. Let them think you're nothing. Because the moment they stop watching is the moment you strike." Caleb stood beside his mother, his shoulders rigid, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He hadn't said a word. Not one. He wouldn't even look at her. Neria wanted to scream at him. She wanted to grab him by the collar and demand to know when he had become this. A coward. A man who let his mother tear his wife apart while he stood there like a statue. But she didn't, because she already knew the answer. He had always been this. She had just been too hopeful to see it. Evelyn took a slow sip of her champagne and turned toward Neria, her eyes cold and sharp. "You know, Neria, I've been meaning to have a conversation with you. Caleb and I have been discussing your situation, and we think it's time for some changes." Neria didn't respond. She just kept staring at her mother's coffin. "We think," Evelyn continued, her voice smooth and venomous, "that it's time you moved out of the estate. You don't really belong there anymore, do you? I mean, let's be realistic. Your mother's gone. You have no income, no real education, no family left. What exactly are you planning to do now?" The room went silent. Every eye in the chapel turned toward Neria, waiting, watching, expecting her to break. Miranda stopped scrolling on her phone and looked up, her expression almost gleeful. Gregory crossed his arms, smirking. Even the priest in the corner shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I'm not trying to be cruel, dear. I'm just being practical. We've already found someone much more suitable for Caleb. Someone with class. Someone who understands our world. Someone who won't embarrass us." Neria's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't move. She felt Caleb's eyes on her now, but she refused to look at him. She couldn't. Because if she looked at him, if she saw that same blank, cowardly expression on his face, she didn't know what she would do. Evelyn leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than everything else. "Your mother was nothing, Neria. And so are you." The words hung in the air like poison. For a moment, Neria felt her knees buckle. She felt the weight of every insult, every humiliation, every year of being treated like dirt pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. But then something else happened. Something deeper. She remembered her mother's hands, rough and calloused from years of work. She remembered the way her mother used to hum while cooking, even when they had nothing but rice and salt. She remembered the way her mother would kiss her forehead every night and whisper, "You are stronger than they will ever know." And she remembered the letter, the one tucked inside her coat pocket right now, the one from her mother's lawyer, the one that began with the words, "Your mother has left you everything." Neria lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met Evelyn's, calm and steady. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. "I'm going to bury my mother with the dignity she deserves. And then I'm going to remember every single word you just said." Evelyn frowned, confused. "Remember? For what?" Neria didn't answer. She turned back to her mother's coffin and placed her hand gently on the wood. She whispered, so softly that no one else could hear, "Thank you, Mama, for everything you built, for everything you hid, for everything you made sure I would inherit." Behind her, the laughter started again. The phones kept flashing. The insults kept flying. But Neria didn't hear them anymore. Because what none of them knew, what not a single person in that room could have imagined, was that the empire they had built their lives on was already hers. The Ashford Corporation, the hospitals, the subsidiaries, the trust, the foundations. Every single asset the Ashford family depended on for their wealth, their status, their power. It all belonged to her. Her mother had spent 30 years building it in secret. Shell companies, hidden trusts, foundations established under different names. All of it meticulously structured to remain invisible until the exact right moment. And that moment was coming. Tomorrow, the will be read. Tomorrow, the lawyer would stand in front of the entire Ashford family and deliver the news that would shatter their world. Tomorrow, the people who had mocked her, humiliated her, and dismissed her as nothing would realize they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because the woman standing silently beside her mother's coffin, the woman they thought was broken and powerless, was about to become untouchable. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. The only question was how long it would take before they started begging, and whether Neria would even bother to listen. Neria's childhood had been forged in fires no one else could see. While other children worried about homework and birthday parties, she had learned to count coins in the dark, to stretch a single meal across 3 days, to sleep through hunger, because complaining wouldn't change anything. Her mother had been 22 when she got pregnant, unmarried, alone, abandoned by a man who promised forever and disappeared the moment he heard the word baby. The world had no sympathy for women like her. Landlords didn't care that she was carrying a child when they raised the rent. Employers didn't care that she was exhausted when they demanded she work double shifts. Relatives didn't care that she was struggling when they called her a disgrace and shut their doors in her face. So she had to work, and worked, and worked. Neria remembered nights when her mother would come home at 2 in the morning smelling like bleach and sweat, her hands raw from scrubbing hospital floors. She would collapse onto their single mattress, too tired to even take off her shoes, and Neria would crawl beside her, tiny fingers trying to massage her mother's aching shoulders. "Mama, why do you work so much?" Neria had asked once, her voice small in the darkness. Her mother had opened her eyes, exhausted but still somehow warm, and whispered, "Because I'm building something, baby. Something they can't see. Something they'll never understand until it's too late." Neria hadn't understood what that meant back then, but she had understood the look in her mother's eyes. Determination, strategy, a quiet, unshakable belief that suffering was temporary, but power, real power, could be permanent if you were smart enough to build it in secret. By the time Neria was 10, her mother had started selling food during the day while still working the night shifts at the hospital. She would wake up at 4 in the morning to prepare rice, stew, and fried plantains, then stand on street corners for hours selling plates to workers and students. People would walk past her without a second glance, treating her like part of the scenery, invisible and insignificant. But her mother never complained. She just smiled, took their money, and tucked it away. Neria would help after school, standing beside her mother with a shy smile, handing out plates and collecting coins. She learned quickly that the world judged you based on appearance, that poverty was treated like a moral failure, that people assumed if you were struggling it was because you deserve it. She learned to keep her head down, to stay quiet, to let people underestimate her, because her mother had taught her something crucial. Invisibility was a weapon. If they don't see you coming, they can't stop you. When Neria turned 16, her mother sat her down at their tiny kitchen table and placed a folder in front of her. Inside were documents, legal papers, corporation filings, trust agreements. Neria had stared at them, confused. "What is this, Mama?" Her mother had smiled, tired but triumphant. "This is everything I've been building since the day you were born. Hospitals, foundations, companies, all in different names, all hidden, all waiting for you." Neria's hands had trembled as she flipped through the pages. "But how? We barely have enough to eat." "That's what they think," her mother had said quietly. "That's what I needed them to think. Every dollar I earned, I split. Half for us to survive, half to invest. I worked with lawyers who owed me favors. I set up shell companies through people I trusted. I built this empire one brick at a time, and no one noticed because they thought I was too poor, too uneducated, too insignificant to matter." Neria had looked up at her mother with tears in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed to learn how to endure first," her mother had said, reaching across the table to take Neria's hand. "You need to know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be humiliated, to be treated like you're nothing. Because one day, when you inherit all of this, you'll face people who will try to take it from you. And you need to be strong enough, smart enough, and patient enough to destroy them without them ever seeing it coming." That conversation had changed everything. Neria had started paying attention differently. She watched how her mother moved through the world, how she absorbed insults without reacting, how she let people believe she was weak while quietly maneuvering behind the scenes. She learned that power wasn't always loud. It didn't always announce itself. Sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones no one noticed. When Neria met Caleb Ashford 3 years later, she had thought, maybe, just maybe, love could be different. He had been kind at first, gentle. He had looked at her like she mattered, like her background didn't define her worth. He had promised to protect her from his family, to stand beside her no matter what they said. She had believed him. She had wanted so desperately to believe him. But the moment they got married and she moved into the Ashford estate, everything changed. Evelyn Ashford had taken one look at Neria and decided she was a threat. Not because Neria had done anything wrong, but because she existed outside of Evelyn's control. She wasn't from their world. She didn't speak their language. She didn't know how to play their games. And that made her dangerous. So Evelyn had set out to break her. Every morning, Neria would wake up to passive-aggressive comments at breakfast. "Oh, Neria, you're wearing that? How quaint." Every afternoon, Evelyn would rearrange plans without telling her, leaving Neria standing alone in empty rooms, humiliated and confused. Every evening, Evelyn would host dinner parties and introduce Neria as Caleb's little project, laughing as if it were a joke while guests exchanged awkward glances. And Caleb? Caleb said nothing. He would sit at the dinner table, fork in hand, eyes on his plate, silent. Neria would look at him, silently begging him to defend her, to say something, to stand up for her the way he had promised. But he never did, because Caleb was weak. He had been raised to obey his mother, to prioritize family image over everything else, and he didn't have the courage to choose his wife over his inheritance. One night, after a particularly brutal dinner, where Evelyn had openly discussed finding Caleb a more suitable wife, Neria had cornered him in their bedroom. "Why won't you say anything?" she had asked, her voice shaking. "Why do you just sit there and let her destroy me?" Caleb had looked at her with guilt written all over his face, but his words had been even worse than his silence. "She's my mother, Neria. I can't just go against her. You don't understand how this family works." "I understand perfectly," Neria had said, her voice cold. "You're a coward." He had flinched, but he hadn't argued, because they both knew it was true. After that night, Neria had stopped expecting him to change. She had stopped hoping he would become the man he had pretended to be. Instead, she had started preparing. She had called her mother's lawyer. She had reviewed the documents. She had made sure everything was in order, because her mother had been right. Endurance wasn't about waiting for someone to save you. It was about surviving long enough to save yourself. And now, standing in that chapel, listening to the Ashfords mock her dead mother, Neria understood exactly what her mother had been preparing her for. Not just wealth, not just power, but justice. The kind of justice that didn't need to announce itself. The kind that waited in silence until the perfect moment. And that moment was coming. Tomorrow, the will be read. Tomorrow, every insult, every humiliation, every cruel laugh would boomerang back onto the people who thought they were untouchable. Tomorrow, the Ashfords would learn what Neria's mother had spent 30 years teaching her daughter. That silence isn't a weakness. It's a strategy. And the quietest people are often the most dangerous. Because by the time you realize they've been planning, it's already too late. The chapel had stopped being a place of mourning the moment the Ashfords walked through the door. What should have been sacred, what should have been protected by the weight of grief and the sanctity of death, had been turned into something else entirely. A spectacle, a performance, a public execution of a woman who could no longer defend herself. Neria stood beside her mother's coffin, her hands folded in front of her, her head bowed, her body so still she could have been mistaken for a statue. But inside, every word, every laugh, every cruel joke was being recorded. Not just by the phones pointed at her from every angle, but by something deeper. Her memory. Her resolve, her patience. Evelyn Ashford moved through the room like a queen holding court, her champagne glass catching the light from the stained glass windows. She was performing, and she knew it. Every gesture was deliberate. Every word was calculated. She wanted Neria to break. She wanted tears. She wanted humiliation, so complete that Neria would have no choice but to leave the family quietly, defeated and forgotten. "You know what the saddest part is?" Evelyn said, turning to a cluster of guests near the back of the chapel. "The saddest part is that this woman actually thought she was building something. She thought scrubbing floors and selling street food was going to give her daughter a better life. But look at Neria. Still poor. Still struggling. Still completely dependent on us." The guests laughed nervously, unsure whether they were supposed to join in or stay silent. Evelyn didn't care. She fed off their discomfort. Miranda stood near the front pew, her phone held high, recording everything. She wasn't even pretending to be discreet anymore. "This is going to get so many views," she whispered to her cousin, Gregory, who stood beside her grinning. "Mom is on fire today." Gregory nodded, scrolling through his own phone. "I'm posting this on the family group chat. Everyone needs to see this." Neria heard every word. She saw every phone. She watched every smirk, every whispered comment, every flash of a camera capturing her humiliation for posterity. And she said nothing, because her mother had taught her that silence wasn't surrender. It was a strategy. Caleb stood near the side entrance, his back pressed against the wall, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He looked like he wanted to disappear. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor as if staring hard enough would make him invisible. Neria turned her head slightly and looked at him. Just for a moment. Just long enough to see if he would meet her eyes. He didn't. He couldn't. Because looking at her would mean acknowledging what was happening. It would mean admitting that his mother was destroying his wife in public, and he was doing nothing to stop it. It would mean confronting the fact that he had chosen his family's approval over the woman he had promised to protect. And Caleb wasn't strong enough for that. So he stayed where he was, silent and complicit, a passive participant in his wife's destruction. Evelyn's voice cut through the room again, sharper this time. I mean, let's be honest. What kind of mother dies and leaves her daughter with nothing? Not even a savings account. Not even a piece of jewelry worth selling. Just debt and disappointment. She turned toward Neria, her eyes cold and triumphant. Tell me, Neria, what exactly did your mother leave you? Anything at all? The room went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every phone turned toward Neria. Everyone waited. Neria lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met Evelyn's, calm and steady, and for just a moment, Evelyn's smile faltered. There was something in Neria's gaze that didn't fit. Something that wasn't broken. Something that wasn't afraid. But before Evelyn could process it, Neria looked away and spoke quietly. She left me everything I need. Evelyn laughed, loud and sharp. Everything you need? You mean nothing. She left you nothing. Neria didn't respond. She turned back to her mother's coffin and placed her hand on the smooth wood, her fingers tracing the grain gently. She whispered, so softly that only she could hear, "Thank you, Mama, for teaching me how to wait." Behind her, the room erupted into laughter again. Miranda zoomed in with her phone, capturing Neria's bent head, her trembling shoulders, her silence. "She's about to cry," Miranda whispered excitedly to Gregory. "I can feel it. This is gold." But Neria wasn't crying. She was counting. Counting the insults. Counting the phones. Counting the people who thought they were safe because she looked weak. She was cataloging every face, every laugh, every cruel word, storing them away for the moment when everything would flip. And that moment was coming, faster than any of them realized. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than everything else. "You don't belong here, Neria. You never did. And now that your mother's gone, there's nothing keeping you tied to this family. Caleb and I have already discussed it. You'll be moving out by the end of the week. We've found someone better for him. Someone who understands what it means to be an Ashford." Neria's hand tightened on the coffin, her knuckles going white. Evelyn smiled, mistaking the tension for weakness. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just go quietly. Sign the papers. Disappear. It's what's best for everyone." Neria turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Evelyn's. When she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and laced with something Evelyn couldn't quite identify. "I'm not going anywhere." Evelyn blinked, surprised. "Excuse me." "I said," Neria repeated, her voice soft but unyielding, "I'm not going anywhere. Not until my mother is buried with the dignity she deserves. And not until everyone in this room understands exactly who she was." Evelyn's smile returned, but it was tight now, forced. "And who was she, Neria? A maid? A street vendor? A woman who died with nothing?" Neria held her gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the coffin without answering. Evelyn laughed again, but this time it sounded uncertain. She straightened, brushing imaginary dust off her dress, and turned back to her guests. "Well, I try to be kind. But some people just don't know when to let go." The funeral procession began shortly after. The pallbearers, hired by the Ashfords and clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the room, lifted the coffin carefully and began moving toward the exit. Neria followed behind, her steps slow and deliberate, her head held high despite the weight pressing down on her chest. As they walked through the chapel doors and into the bright afternoon sun, the Ashfords followed like a parade of vultures. Phones were still recording. Conversations were still happening. The mockery hadn't stopped. It had just moved outside. At the gravesite, the priest said a few words, his voice monotone and detached. He clearly wanted this over with as quickly as possible. Neria stood at the edge of the grave, staring down at the coffin as it was lowered into the ground. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood there, silent and still, while the Ashfords whispered behind her. "How much longer is this going to take?" Miranda muttered. "I have a spa appointment at 4. "Just let her have her moment," Gregory said, scrolling through his phone. "She'll be gone soon anyway." Evelyn stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching Neria with a mixture of satisfaction and impatience. She had won, or so she thought. As the last shovel of dirt was thrown onto the grave, Neria reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter from her mother's attorney, the one she had been carrying since the day her mother died. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She had already read it a dozen times. She knew every word by heart. But holding it now, standing over her mother's grave with the Ashfords laughing behind her, she felt something shift. The storm that had been building inside her for years, the quiet rage that her mother had taught her to control and weaponize, was finally ready to be unleashed. She turned slowly, her eyes sweeping over the Ashfords. Evelyn, Caleb, Miranda, Gregory, every single person who had mocked her mother, every single person who had treated her like she was nothing. And she smiled. Not a big smile, not a triumphant one, just a small, quiet curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. Evelyn frowned, confused. "What's so funny?" Neria didn't answer. She just tucked the letter back into her pocket and walked past them, heading toward the car. Tomorrow, the will be read. Tomorrow, everything will change. And none of them had any idea what was coming. The world had never known what Neria's mother was building. They had seen a poor woman scrubbing floors, selling food on street corners, walking miles in worn-out shoes because she couldn't afford bus fare. They had seen struggle. They had seen poverty. They had seen exactly what she wanted them to see. But beneath the surface, invisible to everyone who had dismissed her as insignificant, she had been constructing an empire. Not loudly, not publicly, but methodically, strategically, with the precision of someone who understood that real power wasn't about being seen. It was about being underestimated until the moment you struck. It started 32 years ago, the year Neria was born. Her mother had been working double shifts at Metropolitan General Hospital, scrubbing operating rooms and mopping hallways while doctors and nurses walked past her as if she were furniture. She had been invisible to them. Just another cleaner. Just another struggling single mother trying to survive. But she had been watching, learning, listening. She had noticed how the hospital administrators talked about expansion plans in the hallways, assuming no one was paying attention. She had overheard budget meetings, construction timelines, investment opportunities. She had absorbed every detail, filing it away in her mind like a soldier studying enemy territory. And then she had done something no one expected. She had started investing. Not much at first. Just a few dollars here and there, scraped together from tips and extra shifts. She had opened a bank account under a business name, something generic and forgettable, and she had started buying shares in small medical supply companies that serviced the hospital. Companies no one paid attention to because they weren't glamorous. They didn't make headlines. They just provided essential services quietly and consistently. Within 5 years, those companies had tripled in value, and she had reinvested every single cent. By the time Neria was 7, her mother had established her first shell company. It was registered under a different name, managed through a lawyer who owed her a favor after she had helped his sick mother get access to affordable treatment. The company existed on paper, invisible to tax authorities, creditors, and anyone who might have questioned how a hospital cleaner could own a business entity. That shell company became the foundation for everything else. Over the next decade, she had layered more companies on top of it, each one registered under different names, each one designed to hide the true ownership. She had created trusts, partnerships, and holding companies that existed in legal gray zones, protected by lawyers who understood discretion and rewarded loyalty. She had bought land. Small parcels at first, in neighborhoods no one wanted, areas people dismissed as worthless. But she had known something they didn't. She had known the city's expansion plans because she had cleaned the mayor's office late at night and read the documents left on his desk. She had known which areas would be rezoned for commercial development, which neighborhoods would see property values skyrocket. And she had bought them all, quietly, patiently, waiting. By the time Neria turned 15, her mother owned 6 buildings, 3 medical supply companies, and a network of trusts worth millions. And no one knew. Not the landlords who had kicked them out. Not the employers who had underpaid her. Not the relatives who had called her a disgrace. Not even Neria. Because her mother understood something crucial. The moment people knew you had power, they would try to take it. So she had kept it hidden, locked away behind legal structures so complex that even experienced accountants would need months to untangle them. And then she had done something even bolder. She had started acquiring hospitals. Not directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she had identified struggling community hospitals, places on the verge of bankruptcy, institutions that were drowning in debt and desperately looking for buyers. She had approached them through intermediaries, lawyers and business managers who presented themselves as representatives of anonymous investors. She had offered fair prices, structured deals that allowed the hospitals to stay open, keep their staff, and continue serving their communities. And in return, she had taken ownership. Quietly. Invisibly. By the time Neria turned 18, her mother owned 4 hospitals outright and held controlling shares in 6 others. The Hale Medical Foundation, named after her maiden name, existed as a registered nonprofit, but the real power was buried in the subsidiary companies, the management contracts, the service agreements that funneled profits into accounts no one was watching. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. And it was completely legal. Her mother had played the long game, sacrificing comfort, sacrificing recognition, sacrificing everything except her daughter's future. And she had won. The night before she died, Neria's mother had called her into the small apartment they still lived in despite having wealth that could have bought them a mansion. Neria had been confused. "Mama, why are we still here? You've been working so hard for so long. When are we going to move somewhere better?" Her mother had smiled, tired but peaceful. "Because the moment we move, people start asking questions. The moment we live differently, people start watching. And I'm not ready for that yet." She had pulled out a folder, thick with documents, and placed it on the table between them. "Everything I've built is here. Every company, every trust, every hospital, every piece of land. It's all yours." Neria had stared at the folder, her hands trembling. "Mama, I don't understand." "How did you? I bled for you," her mother had said simply. "Every insult I swallowed, every floor I scrubbed, every mile I walked. It wasn't just survival, baby. It was a strategy. I was building something they would never see coming. And now it's yours." Neria had opened the folder slowly, flipping through page after page of legal documents, incorporation papers, trust agreements, property deeds. Her hands had shaken as the scope of what her mother had accomplished became clear. Mama, this is billions. Closer to 100 billion if you count the hospitals, the real estate, and the projected growth, her mother had said calmly. But the number doesn't matter. What matters is that you're protected. What matters is that no one can ever treat you the way they treated me. What matters is that when the time comes, you'll have the power to make them pay for every cruel word, every dismissive look, every moment they make you feel small. Neria had looked up, tears streaming down her face. "When is the time, Mama? When do I use this?" Her mother had reached across the table and taken her hand. "You'll know. When they think they've destroyed you. When they think you have nothing left. When they're laughing at your lowest moment. That's when you show them who you really are. That's when you remind them that silence isn't weakness. It's patience." 3 days later, her mother collapsed at work. A heart attack. Suddenly. Irreversible. By the time Neria reached the hospital, she was already gone. And now, standing over her mother's grave, watching the Ashfords mock the woman who had built an empire they didn't even know existed. Neria understood exactly what her mother had meant. The time had come. Tomorrow, the will be read. Tomorrow, Mr. Harrison, her mother's attorney, would stand in front of the entire Ashford family and reveal the truth. Tomorrow, the people who had spent years treating Neria like she was nothing would discover that the empire they worked for, the company that paid their salaries, the wealth they flaunted as their own, it all belonged to her. Every share, every building, every contract. Her mother had made sure of it, and she had made sure there was no way for them to take it back. Neria walked away from the gravesite slowly, her steps measured and deliberate. Behind her, she could hear the Ashfords still talking, still laughing, still completely unaware of what was about to hit them. Evelyn's voice carried across the cemetery. Well, that's finally over. Now we can get back to normal life. Neria will be gone by the end of the week, and we can move forward with the new arrangements. Caleb said nothing, as usual. Miranda giggled. I can't wait to meet Caleb's new wife. Someone actually classy this time. Gregory chimed in. I give Neria 2 days before she's begging to stay. Where else is she going to go? Neria reached the car and paused, her hand on the door handle. She turned back one last time, her eyes sweeping over the Ashfords gathered by the grave. They looked so confident, so secure, so completely certain that they were untouchable. And in less than 24 hours, that certainty would be shattered. Because her mother hadn't just left her wealth. She had left her a weapon. A carefully constructed, legally unbreakable, devastatingly effective weapon designed to do one thing. Destroy anyone who tried to take it. Neria opened the car door and slid inside, pulling the letter from her pocket one more time. She unfolded it slowly and read the final line her mother had written in her own handwriting at the bottom of the legal document. Make them remember, baby. Make them remember that the people they step on are often the ones who rise the highest. And when you rise, don't look back. Just let them fall. Neria folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her pocket. She started the engine, pulled away from the cemetery, and didn't look back. Tomorrow, the world will change. And the Ashfords had no idea they were standing on the edge of a cliff. How much would you sacrifice to make sure your child never suffered the way you did? The conference room at Harrison and Associates smelled like leather and expensive wood polish. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, sunlight streaming through and catching the dust particles floating in the air like tiny diamonds. The room was designed to intimidate, with its long mahogany table, high-back chairs, and walls lined with legal books that probably hadn't been opened in years. It was a kind of room where fortunes were made and destroyed, where families were torn apart by commas and clauses, where power changed hands with the stroke of a pen. Today, it would become a battlefield. The Ashfords arrived 15 minutes early, which was unusual for them. Normally, they treated appointments like suggestions, showing up late and expecting everyone to wait. But today was different. Today was about money, about inheritance, about securing what they believed was rightfully theirs. Evelyn swept into the room first, her designer handbag swinging from her arm, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She chose the seat at the head of the table, even though it wasn't her meeting, even though she had no legal right to be there. But Evelyn Ashford didn't operate based on rights. She operated based on entitlement. Caleb followed behind her, his shoulders hunched, his hands shoved into his pockets. He looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally neat hair was slightly disheveled. He took a seat beside his mother without looking at anyone. Miranda bounced in next, her phone already out, her fingers flying across the screen as she texted someone. This better not take long, she muttered. I have lunch plans. Gregory arrived last, smirking as he dropped into a chair and stretched his legs out under the table. So, how much do you think the old lady left? A few thousand? Maybe some jewelry we can pawn. Evelyn shot him a look. Show some respect, Gregory. We're here for business, not gossip. Right, Gregory said, still grinning. Business. Neria arrived exactly on time. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked into the conference room with her head high, her coat buttoned, her expression calm and unreadable. The moment she stepped through the door, the room went silent. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Caleb looked up briefly, then looked away again. Miranda glanced up from her phone, rolled her eyes, and went back to scrolling. Gregory whistled low under his breath. Wow, Neria. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be too busy packing your things. Neria didn't respond. She took a seat at the opposite end of the table, as far from the Ashfords as possible, and folded her hands in her lap. Her face gave nothing away. No anger. No fear. No anticipation. Just calm. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and Mr. Harrison walked in. He was in his late 50s, tall and lean, with silver hair combed back and a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a thick folder in the other. He moved with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades navigating the ugliest parts of human nature and come out unshaken. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth and professional. He set the folder on the table and took his seat at the center. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time, and I'll do my best to make this process as efficient as possible." Evelyn leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "Let's get to it, Mr. Harrison. We all have busy schedules." Mr. Harrison glanced at her briefly, his expression neutral. "Of course." He opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of documents. The sound of paper rustling filled the room. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "I am here today to execute the last will and testament of Mrs. Helena Hale, who passed away 3 days ago. As per her explicit instructions, this reading will cover the distribution of all assets, properties, and holdings under her name and associated entities." Evelyn's lips curved into a small smile. She glanced at Neria, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "I'm sure this won't take long." The poor woman didn't have much to leave behind. Mr. Harrison didn't acknowledge the comment. He simply continued. "Mrs. Hale's estate is extensive. It includes multiple properties, corporate holdings, medical facilities, and financial assets. The total estimated value, as of the most recent audit, is approximately $103 billion. The room exploded. Gregory shot upright in his chair, his eyes wide. "What?" Miranda's phone clattered onto the table. "Did he just say billion?" Caleb's head snapped up, his mouth slightly open. Even Evelyn, normally so composed, looked genuinely shocked. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. "That's impossible," Evelyn said, her voice sharp. "There must be some mistake. Helena Hale was a cleaning woman. She sold food on the street. She lived in a one-room apartment. How could she possibly have billions?" Mr. Harrison looked at her calmly. Mrs. Hale was many things, Mrs. Ashford. But being poor was not one of them. Over the past 3 decades, she built a substantial portfolio of medical facilities, real estate holdings, and corporate subsidiaries, all of which were structured under various legal entities to ensure privacy and protection. Evelyn's hands tightened on the table. And where exactly did all of this supposed wealth come from? "Strategic investment," Mr. Harrison said simply. Mrs. Hale was an exceptionally intelligent businesswoman. She identified opportunities, invested wisely, and built an empire quietly and methodically. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room. "And now we move to the distribution of assets." The Ashfords leaned forward, their shock giving way to greed. This was what they had come for. This was what they had been waiting for. Mr. Harrison pulled out another document and began reading. "To my daughter, Neria Hale, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes all shares, properties, subsidiaries, and holdings under the Hale Medical Foundation and its associated entities. Full ownership. No conditions. No restrictions." The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn's face went pale. Caleb looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Miranda stared at Neria, her mouth hanging open. Gregory laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound, then stopped abruptly when no one else joined in. "Wait," Evelyn said slowly, her voice trembling. Wait. You're saying everything goes to Neria? Everything. That is correct, Mr. Harrison said. Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's ridiculous. Neria is married to my son. She's part of this family. That means the assets should be distributed among all of us. That's how inheritance works. Mr. Harrison looked at her over his glasses. Mrs. Ashford, with all due respect, that is not how inheritance works. Mrs. Hale's will is clear and legally binding. Neria Hale is the sole beneficiary. No other party has any claim to the estate. Evelyn's face flushed red. This is outrageous. We'll contest it. We'll take this to court. There's no way a woman like Helena Hale could have accumulated that kind of wealth legally. There has to be fraud involved. Manipulation. Something. Mr. Harrison's expression didn't change. You are welcome to pursue legal action if you wish. However, I should inform you that Mrs. Hale anticipated such a possibility. She included specific contingency clauses in the will. He pulled out another document. In the event that any party attempts to contest the will or challenge the legitimacy of the estate, all personal assets tied to employment within the Hale Medical Foundation and its subsidiaries will be immediately forfeited. This includes salaries, benefits, stock options, and severance packages. Evelyn's eyes widened. What are you talking about? What does the Hale Medical Foundation have to do with us? Mr. Harrison looked at her calmly. Mrs. Ashford, are you familiar with the Ashford Corporation? Of course I am, Evelyn snapped. It's our family company. We've built it over generations. Actually, Mr. Harrison said quietly, the Ashford Corporation is a subsidiary of the Hale Medical Foundation. It has been for the past 12 years. Your family has been employed by Mrs. Hale's organization without knowing it. The room went completely silent. Evelyn stared at him, her face frozen in shock. Caleb looked like he might be sick. Miranda's hands trembled as she picked up her phone and then set it down again. Gregory's smirk had vanished entirely. That's impossible, Evelyn whispered. Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. He spread them across the table. Corporate filings, acquisition agreements, stock transfer records, employment contracts. Every single one bore the name Hale Medical Foundation at the top. 12 years ago, Mr. Harrison said, his voice calm and methodical, the Ashford Corporation was on the verge of bankruptcy. Mrs. Hale purchased it through a holding company, restructured the debt, and allowed your family to continue operating under the belief that it was still yours. She did this quietly, without fanfare, because she wanted to ensure that her daughter would one day have control over the people who had treated her so poorly. Neria sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless. But inside, her heart was pounding. This was the moment her mother had prepared her for. This was the moment everything changed. Evelyn turned toward Neria, her eyes blazing. You knew this whole time. Neria met her gaze calmly. I found out the day my mother died. And you said nothing, Evelyn hissed. You let us humiliate ourselves. You let us mock her at the funeral. You stood there and said nothing. Yes, Neria said quietly. I did. Evelyn's hand shook. You vindictive little, Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Harrison interrupted, his voice sharp. I would advise you to choose your next words very carefully. Any further harassment of my client could result in immediate termination of your employment and forfeiture of all associated benefits. Evelyn's mouth snapped shut. She sank back into her chair, her face pale. Mr. Harrison turned to Neria. Mrs. Hale, as the sole owner of the Hale Medical Foundation and all its subsidiaries, you now have full authority over all employment decisions, corporate strategy, and asset distribution. Do you have any immediate instructions? Neria looked across the table at the Ashfords, at Evelyn, who had mocked her mother's memory, at Caleb, who had stood silent while his family destroyed her, at Miranda and Gregory, who had recorded her humiliation for entertainment. And she smiled. Small, calm, devastating. Not yet, she said softly. But soon. The room fell silent again. And for the first time in her life, the Ashfords had absolutely nothing to say. The Ashfords refused to accept defeat. Pride, after all, was a dangerous thing. It made people reckless. It made them believe they could bend reality to match their expectations. And for the Ashfords, the idea that Neria, the woman they had spent years belittling and dismissing, now controlled their entire world was simply unacceptable. So they did what entitled people always do when confronted with loss. They fought back. 3 days after the will reading, Evelyn sat in the office of Gerald Whitmore, one of the most expensive lawyers in the city. His office was all glass and steel, designed to project power and success. Evelyn had paid $15,000 just for this consultation, but she didn't care. Money meant nothing if she lost control of everything. Gerald leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he reviewed the documents Evelyn had brought. He was in his early 60s, with perfectly gray hair and a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He had built his career on finding loopholes, on twisting laws until they said what his clients needed them to say. "This is quite the situation you found yourself in, Mrs. Ashford," he said finally, his voice smooth and measured. "Situation," Evelyn said sharply. "This is theft. That woman manipulated my son into marriage so she could steal our family's company." Gerald raised an eyebrow. "From what I can see here, the company was never yours to begin with. The Hale Medical Foundation acquired the Ashford Corporation 12 years ago. Legally, everything was filed properly. Every document is legitimate." "I don't care," Evelyn snapped. "There has to be something we can do. Challenge the acquisition. Claim fraud. Prove that Helena Hale manipulated the system." Gerald sighed and set the documents down. "Mrs. Ashford, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen people try to overturn wills, contest acquisitions, and challenge trusts. And I can tell you right now, this is one of the most airtight structures I've ever seen. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing. So you're saying there's nothing we can do?" Evelyn's voice rose. "I'm not saying that," Gerald said calmly. "I'm saying it's going to be difficult and expensive. We'd need to challenge the validity of the trust documents, question the incorporation filings, and possibly argue that Helena Hale lacked the mental capacity to manage such complex financial structures." Evelyn leaned forward. "Can you do it?" Gerald paused, considering. "I can try. But you need to understand that even if we file, there's a very real possibility that we'll lose. And according to the contingency clauses in the will, any legal challenge triggers automatic forfeiture of personal assets tied to the company. That means salaries, benefits, stock options, everything." "I don't care," Evelyn said coldly. "I want my company back." 2 weeks later, the lawsuit was filed. Ashford Family Trust versus Hale Medical Foundation. The legal paperwork was thick, filled with accusations of fraud, manipulation, and undue influence. Evelyn's lawyers argued that Helena Hale couldn't possibly have built such an empire on her own, that the documents must have been forged, that the whole structure was designed to steal from the Ashford family. The media picked up the story immediately. Headlines screamed about the billionaire cleaning woman, the hidden empire, the family betrayal. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward anyone who walked by. Neria ignored all of it. She had expected this. Her mother had warned her that people like the Ashfords never went down quietly. They would fight. They would lie. They would burn everything to the ground rather than admit they had lost. But her mother had also prepared her for exactly this moment. The day the lawsuit was filed, Neria sat in her new office at the headquarters of the Hale Medical Foundation. It was a corner office on the 42nd floor with panoramic views of the city. Her mother had never used it. She had kept it empty, waiting for the day Neria would finally claim what was hers. Now, sitting behind the massive desk, Neria felt the weight of everything her mother had built settling onto her shoulders. Mr. Harrison sat across from her, his briefcase open, documents spread across the desk. "They're going to argue about mental incapacity," he said calmly. "They'll claim your mother wasn't educated enough to manage complex financial structures, that someone must have manipulated her or forged documents on her behalf." Neria nodded. "And what do we have?" Mr. Harrison smiled slightly. Everything. He pulled out a thick folder and opened it. Inside were decades of records. Bank statements showing every deposit, every investment, every transaction her mother had made. Corporate filings with her mother's signature, notarized and verified. Testimony from lawyers, accountants, and business partners who had worked with her directly. Video recordings of her mother attending board meetings, making decisions, signing contracts. Your mother documented everything, Mr. Harrison said. Every single move she made, she recorded. She knew that one day someone would try to claim she didn't build this herself. So she made sure there was no room for doubt. Neria flipped through the documents slowly, her chest tightening. Her mother had known. She had known exactly how this would play out. She had known the Ashfords would fight. And she had made sure Neria had every weapon she needed to destroy them. When does the trial start? Neria asked. 3 months, Mr. Harrison said. But we're not going to wait that long. Neria looked up. What do you mean? Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Your mother included a clause in the employment contracts of every Ashford family member. It states that any legal action taken against the Hale Medical Foundation results in immediate suspension of all benefits, pending the outcome of the case. That means, as of today, the Ashfords no longer receive salaries, stock dividends, or company perks. Neria's eyes widened. They'll have no income. Correct, Mr. Harrison said. And given their lifestyle, I estimate they'll burn through their savings in about 6 weeks. Maybe less. Neria sat back, processing. So we just wait. We wait, Mr. Harrison confirmed. And we let them destroy themselves. The next few weeks were brutal for the Ashfords. Without their salaries, the bills started piling up. The country club memberships lapsed. The luxury cars were repossessed. The credit cards maxed out. Evelyn, who had spent decades living off the company's wealth, suddenly found herself unable to pay for the lifestyle she had built. She had to let go of the housekeepers, the personal chef, and the driver. She had to cancel the spa appointments, the shopping trips, the vacations. For the first time in her life, Evelyn Ashford had to worry about money. And she hated every second of it. Caleb tried to find work, but his resume was a joke. He had spent his entire adult life in a position his mother had secured for him, doing minimal work and coasting on the family name. No one wanted to hire him. Miranda and Gregory fared even worse. Neither of them had ever worked a real job. They had lived off trust funds and family connections their entire lives. Now, with the money cut off, they had no idea how to survive. The pressure broke them faster than Neria had expected. 6 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Evelyn showed up at the Hale Medical Foundation headquarters. She looked different, older, tired. Her hair wasn't styled. Her clothes, while still expensive, were wrinkled. She had lost weight. The receptionist called up to Neria's office. Mrs. Ashford is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. Neria hesitated, then said, send her up. When Evelyn walked into the office, she looked around with barely concealed bitterness. This should have been hers. This power, this view, this control. But instead, it belonged to the girl she had spent years trying to break. Neria stood behind her desk, her hands folded, her expression calm. Mrs. Ashford, what can I do for you? Evelyn's jaw tightened. I want to talk. Then talk, Neria said. Evelyn took a breath, clearly struggling. I think we can settle this. Outside of court. We can reach an agreement that benefits everyone. An agreement, Neria repeated. Yes, Evelyn said quickly. We drop the lawsuit. You reinstate our positions in the company. We continue as we were. No one has to lose anything. Neria tilted her head slightly. And what do I get out of this agreement? Evelyn blinked, as if the question surprised her. You get to keep the company. You get everything your mother left you. We're not asking for ownership. Just our jobs. Our income. Our place in the family business. Our place, Neria said softly. The same place where you mocked my mother at her funeral? Where you recorded my grief for entertainment? Where you planned to throw me out of my own home? Evelyn's face flushed. That was, we were grieving. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional. You weren't grieving, Neria said, her voice cold. You were celebrating. You thought my mother's death meant I would finally disappear. That you could erase me and move on with your perfect, controlled life. Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. Neria, please. We're family. No, Neria said quietly. We're not. We never were. You made that very clear. Evelyn's composure cracked. What do you want from us? You want us to beg? Fine. I'm begging. Please. Drop the contingency clause. Let us keep our jobs. We'll stay out of your way. We won't interfere. Neria looked at her for a long moment. You humiliated my mother. You mocked her life. You dismissed her sacrifices. And now you want mercy. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but Neria couldn't tell if they were real or calculated. I'm sorry, Evelyn whispered. I'm sorry for everything. Please. Neria walked around the desk slowly until she was standing directly in front of Evelyn. When she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and final. No. Evelyn's face went pale. What? I said no, Neria repeated. The lawsuit continues. The contingency clause stands. And when you lose, and you will lose, you'll have nothing. Just like you tried to leave me with nothing. Evelyn stared at her, disbelief and rage warring on her face. You can't do this. I already have, Neria said. She walked back to her desk and sat down. You can see yourself out. Evelyn stood there for a moment, trembling with fury, then turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. Neria sat alone in the silence, her hand steady, her heart calm. The Ashfords had made their choice. Now they would live with the consequences. Would you forgive someone who destroyed you if they begged, or would you let them fall? The courtroom was packed, every seat filled. Reporters lined the back wall, notebooks ready, cameras positioned for the perfect shot. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It had become a spectacle, a story about wealth, betrayal, and the ultimate reversal of power. Everyone wanted to see how it would end. The Ashfords sat on the left side of the courtroom, their expensive lawyers arranged around them like a shield. Evelyn sat perfectly straight, her face composed, but her hands gripped the armrests of her chair so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Caleb sat beside her, staring at the floor. Miranda scrolled through her phone until the judge entered, and she was forced to put away. Gregory slouched in his seat, trying to look bored, but his leg bounced nervously under the table. On the right side, Neria sat alone, except for Mr. Harrison. She wore a simple black suit, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what was necessary. She looked calm, untouchable, like someone who had already won and was just waiting for everyone else to realize it. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Caroline Brennan, entered and took her seat. The bailiff called the court to order, and the room fell silent. We are here today, Judge Brennan began, to hear arguments in the case of Ashford Family Trust versus Hale Medical Foundation. The plaintiffs are challenging the validity of the estate of Helena Hale and the legitimacy of the corporate structures established under her name. Mr. Whitmore, you may begin. Gerald Whitmore stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. He was confident, smooth. He had argued hundreds of cases and won most of them. He walked to the center of the courtroom and addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about deception. Helena Hale was a woman with a 5th-grade education who worked as a hospital cleaner and street vendor. The plaintiffs argue that it is simply not credible that such a person could have built a $100 billion empire without assistance, manipulation, or outright fraud. He gestured toward the documents on the table. We have reason to believe that these corporate structures were created by third parties who exploited Mrs. Hale's name for their own gain, and that the current beneficiary, Neria Hale, was complicit in this scheme. We are asking the court to investigate the legitimacy of these assets and to restore control to the rightful parties. The courtroom murmured. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled notes. Gerald sat down, looking satisfied. Judge Brennan turned to Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, your response. Mr. Harrison stood slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He simply walked to the center of the room and spoke with quiet authority. Your Honor, the plaintiff's argument rests entirely on a single assumption, that Helena Hale was too uneducated, too poor, and too insignificant to have built this empire herself. That assumption is not only false, it is offensive. He walked to the evidence table and picked up a thick binder. Mrs. Hale documented every single financial decision she made over the past 32 years. Every investment, every acquisition, every trust, every shell company, every signature, every transaction. All of it is here, notarized, verified, and legally sound. He opened the binder and began pulling out documents, handing them to the bailiff to pass to the judge. Bank statements showing incremental investments dating back to 1993. Corporate filings with Mrs. Hale's signature, witnessed by licensed notaries. Video recordings of Mrs. Hale attending board meetings, negotiating contracts, and making executive decisions. Testimony from attorneys, accountants, and business managers who work directly with her and can confirm her involvement in every aspect of this empire. He paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle over the room. Mrs. Hale was not a victim. She was a strategist. She was brilliant. And she built this empire legally, methodically, and with full awareness of exactly what she was doing. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. Mr. Harrison turned toward the Ashfords. The plaintiffs claim they are the rightful owners of the Ashford Corporation. But the facts tell a different story. 12 years ago, the Ashford Corporation was bankrupt, drowning in debt, on the verge of collapse. Helena Hale purchased it through a holding company, restructured the debt, and saved it from ruin. She allowed the Ashford family to continue working under the belief that it was still theirs because she wanted her daughter to one day have control over the people who had treated her so poorly. Evelyn's face went pale. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Harrison continued. But what the plaintiffs don't know, what they couldn't have anticipated, is that Mrs. Hale also anticipated this exact moment. She knew that when her estate was revealed, the Ashfords would challenge it. She knew they would claim fraud. She knew they would fight. He turned back to the judge. And so she prepared a second layer of evidence. Evidence that not only proves her legitimacy, but also exposes the plaintiff's true motives. He gestured to his assistant, who wheeled in a small cart with a laptop and a projector. Within moments, the screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life. What you are about to see, Mr. Harrison said, are recordings that Mrs. Hale made over the past 5 years. Conversations, meetings, private discussions, all recorded with full legal consent under single-party consent laws. The room erupted in whispers. Judge Brennan banged her gavel. Order. The first video began playing. It was a recording from a hidden camera in the Ashford Estates dining room. The date stamp in the corner read 3 years ago. Evelyn and Caleb sat at the table, documents spread out in front of them. Evelyn's voice came through clearly. We need to get rid of her, Caleb. Neria doesn't fit this family. She's an embarrassment. People are starting to ask questions about why you married someone so beneath us. Caleb's voice, quieter, responded. She's my wife, Mother. She's a mistake, Evelyn snapped. And mistakes can be corrected. I've already spoken to a lawyer. We can file for divorce on grounds of incompatibility. We'll make sure she gets nothing, not a penny. And then we'll find you someone appropriate. Someone who understands what it means to be an Ashford. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. All right, if you think it's best. The video ended. The courtroom was silent. Neria sat perfectly still, her face expressionless, but inside, her heart was pounding. She had known about this conversation. Her mother had told her about it. But seeing it played out in front of everyone, seeing the proof of their betrayal, was something else entirely. The next video started. This one was from the funeral reception. Miranda and Gregory stood near the back of the chapel, phones out, laughing. This is comedy gold, Gregory said, zooming in on Neria, standing by the coffin. I'm posting this everywhere. Hashtag poor people problems. Miranda giggled. Mom is destroying her. This is the best funeral I've ever been to. The video ended. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. I will clear this courtroom if necessary. Evelyn looked like she might be sick. Miranda had gone pale, her hands trembling. Gregory stared at the screen in horror. Mr. Harrison let the chaos settle before continuing. These recordings prove beyond any doubt that the Ashford family had no respect for Neria or her mother. They prove that their lawsuit is not about justice. It's about greed. It's about maintaining control over wealth they never earned and power they never deserved. He turned to the judge. But there's more, Your Honor. Mrs. Hale also included provisions in her will specifically designed to protect her daughter from exactly this kind of attack. He pulled out another document. Any party that challenges the legitimacy of the Hale Medical Foundation forfeits not only their employment, but also any personal assets acquired through their connection to the company. This includes real estate purchased with company funds, vehicles leased under company accounts, and stock options granted as part of their compensation packages. Evelyn shot to her feet. You can't do that. That's everything we have. Sit down, Mrs. Ashford, Judge Brennan said sharply. Evelyn sat, but her hands were shaking. Mr. Harrison continued. Furthermore, Mrs. Hale documented every instance of harassment, manipulation, and coercion that Neria endured during her marriage. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every plan to marginalize her. All of it recorded. All of it is admissible as evidence. He pulled out a USB drive and handed it to the bailiff. This drive contains over 300 hours of recordings spanning 5 years. Conversations between Evelyn Ashford and her children discussing how to force Neria out of the family. Meetings with lawyers planning the divorce. Private discussions about finding Caleb a more suitable wife. All of it is documented. All of it proves that this lawsuit is not about legitimacy. It's about revenge. The courtroom was in chaos now. Reporters were on their feet. Cameras were flashing. The judge banged her gavel so hard it echoed through the room. Enough. Mr. Whitmore, do you have anything to say in response to this evidence? Gerald Whitmore stood slowly, his confidence shattered. He looked at the recordings, at the documents, at the USB drive, and he knew. He knew they had lost. Your Honor, he said quietly, I would like to request a recess to consult with my clients. Denied, Judge Brennan said coldly. You brought this case to my courtroom. You made accusations of fraud and manipulation. And now you're going to sit here and face the consequences of those accusations. She looked at the evidence spread across the bench, then at the Ashfords, then at Neria. I've seen a lot of cases in my career, but I've never seen anything quite like this. Mrs. Hale didn't just build an empire. She built a trap. A perfectly legal, meticulously documented trap designed to catch anyone who tried to take what she had built. She picked up her gavel. The plaintiff's case is dismissed. Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate enforcement of the contingency clauses outlined in the will. All personal assets tied to the Hale Medical Foundation are to be forfeited. All employment contracts are terminated effective immediately. And I am imposing sanctions on the plaintiffs for bringing a frivolous lawsuit to this court. The gavel came down. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Evelyn sat frozen, her face blank. Caleb had his head in his hands. Miranda was crying. Gregory looked like he wanted to run. And Neria, sitting quietly on the other side of the room, finally allowed herself to smile. It was small, barely visible. But it was there, because after years of humiliation, after years of being told she was nothing, after years of enduring their cruelty and their mockery, she had finally won. Not by fighting, not by screaming, but by waiting, by being patient, by letting them destroy themselves. Her mother had been right all along. Silence wasn't weakness. It was the most dangerous weapon of all. How does it feel watching the people who hurt you lose everything they thought they owned? The gavel's echo had barely faded when the courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning, microphones thrust toward the Ashfords, who sat frozen in their seats. The verdict had just stripped them of everything. their jobs, their assets, their reputation. Their carefully constructed world had collapsed in seconds, and the whole city was watching. Evelyn sat rigid, her face drained of color, her eyes fixed on nothing. For the first time in her life, she had no words, no cutting remarks, no strategic response. She had been utterly, completely defeated. And worse, it had happened in public. Every camera in that room had captured her downfall. Every reporter had documented her humiliation. Within hours, the story would be everywhere. The family who had mocked a dead woman at her funeral only to discover they had been working for her daughter all along. Miranda was crying openly now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She looked nothing like the confident, mocking girl who had recorded Neria's grief just weeks ago. Gregory had his head down, his phone clutched in his hand, scrolling desperately through messages as friends and associates began cutting ties. Caleb hadn't moved. He sat with his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He had lost everything: his mother's approval, his wife's trust, his family's wealth, and now his dignity. Judge Brennan's voice cut through the noise. This court is adjourned. Bailiff, clear the room. Security moved in, ushering reporters toward the exits. But the damage was done. The story was already out. Hashtags were trending. News outlets were running breaking headlines. The Ashfords, who had spent decades building their image as untouchable elites, had become a cautionary tale in less than an hour. Neria stood slowly, gathering her things with calm precision. She didn't rush. She didn't gloat. She simply walked toward the exit, Mr. Harrison beside her, while behind them the Ashfords remained seated, trapped in the wreckage of their own arrogance. As Neria reached the courtroom doors, Caleb's voice stopped her. Neria. She paused but didn't turn around. Please, Caleb said, his voice breaking. Please, just talk to me. Neria turned slowly. Caleb had stood up, his face pale, his eyes red. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had physically shrunk him. What do you want me to say, Caleb? Neria asked, her voice calm. I'm sorry, Caleb whispered. I'm so sorry. For everything. For not standing up for you. For letting my mother control everything. For being too weak to protect you. Neria looked at him for a long moment. You're right. You were weak. You are weak. Caleb flinched. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But please, Neria, don't do this. Don't take everything. We can start over. We can fix this. Fix this. Neria repeated, her voice quiet but sharp. Caleb, you stood beside your mother while she mocked my mother at her funeral. You said nothing when she planned to throw me out. You agreed to divorce me so you could marry someone more suitable. And now that you've lost everything, you want to fix it. Caleb's hands trembled. I was stupid. I was wrong. But I loved you. I still love you. No, Neria said softly. You loved the idea of having someone who wouldn't challenge you. Someone quiet. Someone easy to control. You never loved me, Caleb. You just didn't hate me enough to stop your mother from destroying me. Tears ran down Caleb's face. What do you want from me? Tell me what I can do to make this right. Neria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to know what it's like to be powerless, to be humiliated, to stand in a room full of people who think you're worthless and have no one defend you. I want you to understand that every choice has a consequence, and yours just caught up with you. She turned and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Behind her, Caleb collapsed into a seat, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was waiting. Reporters surrounded Neria the moment she stepped through the doors, shouting questions, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in her face. Mrs. Hale, how does it feel to win? Did you know about your mother's empire before she died? What are you going to do with the Ashford Corporation? Will you forgive your husband? Neria stopped at the top of the courthouse steps. Mr. Harrison moved to shield her, but she raised a hand. It's all right. She turned to face the cameras, her expression calm and composed. The crowd quieted, waiting. My mother spent 30 years building something extraordinary, Neria said, her voice steady. She did it quietly. She did it without recognition. She did it because she wanted to make sure her daughter would never be powerless. She endured humiliation, poverty, and dismissal so that I could stand here today and say this. She paused, letting the cameras focus. Cruelty has consequences. Arrogance has consequences. And people who build their lives on the suffering of others will eventually face justice. Not because I wanted revenge, but because my mother believed that power should belong to those who understand what it means to have nothing. The reporters erupted with more questions, but Neria simply turned and walked down the steps toward the waiting car. Mr. Harrison followed, and within moments they were inside, the door closing behind them, cutting off the noise. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Neria leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. "Are you all right?" Mr. Harrison asked. Neria opened her eyes and looked out the window. "I don't know. I thought this would feel different. I thought I'd feel satisfied. But I just feel tired." "That's normal," Mr. Harrison said gently. "Justice doesn't always feel the way we expect it to. Sometimes it just feels like the end of something painful." Neria nodded. "What happens now?" "Now," Mr. Harrison said, "you decide what to do with everything you've inherited. You have complete control over the Hale Medical Foundation, the Ashford Corporation, and every subsidiary under your mother's name. You can restructure. You can sell. You can expand. Whatever you choose, it's yours." Neria was quiet for a moment. "What would my mother want me to do?" Mr. Harrison smiled slightly. "Your mother wanted you to be free. Free to make your own choices. Free to live without fear. Free to use your power however you see fit. She didn't build this empire to control you. She built it to protect you." Neria looked down at her hands. "Then I know what I need to do." 3 days later, Neria held a press conference at the headquarters of the Hale Medical Foundation. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and industry leaders. Everyone wanted to know what the newest billionaire would do with her empire. Neria stood at the podium, dressed simply but professionally, her mother's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. She looked out at the crowd and began. "When my mother died, she left me more than just wealth. She left me a responsibility to honor the sacrifices she made, a responsibility to use this power wisely, and a responsibility to make sure that what happened to her never happens to anyone else." She clicked a button, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind her. "Today, I am announcing the restructuring of the Hale Medical Foundation. All hospitals under our control will implement new policies to protect low-income workers. Fair wages, health care benefits, education programs, child care support. No one who works for this foundation will ever have to choose between feeding their family and paying rent." The room erupted in applause. Neria waited for it to quiet before continuing. "I'm also announcing the creation of the Helena Hale Scholarship Fund. Every year, we will provide full scholarships to 100 students from low-income families who want to pursue careers in medicine, business, or law. Students like my mother, who never had the opportunity, but had the intelligence and the drive to succeed." More applause. Neria's voice grew stronger. "And finally, I am announcing that the Ashford Corporation will be renamed the Helena Hale Medical Group. It will continue to operate, but under new leadership. Leadership that values people over profit. Leadership that understands that true success is measured not by how much you take, but by how much you give back." The applause was deafening. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. And somewhere, watching from a television in a small apartment they could barely afford, the Ashfords sat in silence. Evelyn stared at the screen, her face blank. She had lost everything. Her home, her status, her influence. And now, even the family name was being erased, replaced by the name of the woman she had mocked. The woman she had dismissed as worthless. Caleb sat beside her, his eyes hollow. He had tried calling Neria 17 times in the past 3 days. She hadn't answered once. Miranda had stopped crying, but only because she had no tears left. She had been cut off by every friend she thought she had. No one wanted to be associated with a family that had humiliated a dead woman and lost everything because of it. Gregory had left the city entirely, too ashamed to face anyone. And as they sat there, watching Nerea speak with calm authority about building a legacy in her mother's name, they finally understood. They hadn't just lost a legal battle. They had lost a war they didn't even know they were fighting. Because while they had been focused on maintaining appearances and protecting their status, Nerea's mother had been building something that couldn't be taken. Something that couldn't be destroyed. Something that would outlast all of them. And now, the woman they had tried to break was standing in front of the world, untouchable, powerful, and free. While they sat in the ruins of everything they thought they owned. Justice, it turned out, didn't always come with a loud crash. Sometimes it came quietly, patiently, and when it finally arrived, it was absolute. If you had the power to rebuild everything, would you use it for revenge or for something greater? The judgment had been delivered. The Ashfords had been stripped of everything. The world had watched them fall. And now, Nerea stood at the center of an empire her mother had built in silence, with the power to do whatever she wanted. She could have destroyed them further. She could have made speeches about their cruelty, given interviews detailing every humiliation, turned their downfall into entertainment. The world was waiting for it. Reporters called daily, offering massive sums for exclusive interviews. Talk shows wanted her as a guest. Publishers reached out about book deals. Everyone wanted to hear her story, wanted to see her celebrate her victory, wanted to watch her publicly dismantle the family that had tried to break her. But Nerea did none of that. Because her mother had taught her something more valuable than revenge. She had taught her that real power didn't need an audience. Real power moved quietly, deliberately, and left no room for doubt. 2 weeks after the trial, Nerea sat in her office reviewing financial reports. The Hale Medical Foundation was thriving. The hospitals were operating at full capacity. The scholarship fund had received over 10,000 applications. The restructuring of the Ashford Corporation, now the Helena Hale Medical Group, was complete. Everything her mother had built was not only intact, it was growing. Mr. Harrison knocked on the door and entered, carrying a folder. "The final papers have been processed," he said, setting the folder on her desk. "The Ashfords have been officially removed from all company properties. Their personal assets have been liquidated to cover legal fees and outstanding debts. They've been left with exactly what they're entitled to under the law." "Which is?" Nerea asked. "Approximately $14,000 each," Mr. Harrison said. "Enough to survive for a few months if they're careful. But nothing more." Nerea nodded slowly. "And the divorce papers?" "Caleb signed them yesterday," Mr. Harrison said. "He didn't contest anything. The marriage is officially dissolved." Nerea felt something shift in her chest. Not sadness, not relief, just finality. The chapter of her life that had been defined by the Ashfords was over. "There's one more thing," Mr. Harrison said. He pulled a smaller envelope from the folder and handed it to her. "Your mother left this for you. She instructed me to give it to you only after the legal proceedings were complete." Nerea took the envelope carefully. Her mother's handwriting was on the front, neat and deliberate. "To my daughter, when the storm has passed." She opened it slowly and pulled out a single handwritten letter. "My dearest Nerea, if you're reading this, it means you won. Not just in court, not just in reclaiming what was yours, but in surviving the people who tried to break you. I'm so proud of you. I know this journey has been painful. I know you've endured things no one should have to endure. I know there were nights when you wondered if it would ever end, if you would ever be free. But you made it. And now, you stand exactly where I hoped you would. Powerful, protected, free. I need to tell you something important, something I couldn't say while I was alive, because you needed to discover it on your own. This empire I built, this wealth I accumulated, this power I spent 30 years constructing, it was never about the money. It was about making sure you would never be powerless. It was about making sure that no one could ever treat you the way the world treated me. It was about giving you the freedom to choose your own life without fear. But here's the truth, baby. Revenge is empty. I know it feels good right now. I know watching them fall felt like justice. And it was justice. But if you let that feeling define you, if you let their cruelty shape who you become, then they win. Even in their defeat, they win. Because they will have turned you into someone bitter, someone cold, someone who measures success by how much others have lost. And you are better than that. So here's what I want you to do. Take this power, take this wealth, take this empire, and use it to build something beautiful. Something that helps people who remind you of us. People who are invisible. People who are dismissed. People who are told they don't matter. Prove that kindness is more powerful than revenge. Prove that the best way to defeat people who tried to destroy you is to become someone they could never be. Someone generous. Someone compassionate. Someone who lifts others up instead of tearing them down. Let them live with their shame. Let them see what you become. And let that be the final, unspoken reminder that they were wrong about you. I love you, my brilliant, strong, beautiful daughter. Make me proud, Mama. Neria read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. When she finally looked up, Mr. Harrison was watching her quietly. She was right, you know, he said gently. About everything. Neria wiped her eyes and nodded. I know. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. Somewhere down there, the Ashfords were struggling. Evelyn was probably sitting in a tiny apartment, bitter and angry, blaming everyone but herself. Caleb was likely working some entry-level job, humiliated by how far he had fallen. Miranda and Gregory were probably still trying to convince old friends to take them back, not understanding that their reputation was permanently destroyed. They had lost everything, and Neria had won. But standing there, looking out at the city her mother had conquered in silence, Neria realized her mother was right. Revenge fell hollow. Watching them suffer didn't bring her mother back. It didn't erase the years of humiliation. It didn't heal the wounds. It just left her standing alone in an office, surrounded by wealth and power, wondering what came next. She turned back to Mr. Harrison. I want to set up a program, she said. A program. For people like my mother, Neria said. People who work invisible jobs. Cleaners, janitors, cooks, street vendors. People who are essential but dismissed. I want to offer them business training, financial literacy courses, startup funding. I want to help them build their own empires. Mr. Harrison smiled. Your mother would have loved that. And I want it to be free, Neria continued. No strings attached. No requirements. Just an opportunity for people who have never had one. Consider done, Mr. Harrison said. One more thing, Neria said. I want to reach out to the Ashfords. Not to gloat. Not to rub it in. But to offer them something. Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I'm sure, Neria said. My mother taught me that the best revenge is to become someone they could never be. And I want to be someone who offers mercy even when it's not deserved. 3 days later, Neria sent a letter to each member of the Ashford family. It was short, simple, and handwritten. Dear Evelyn, Caleb, Miranda, and Gregory, I know the past few months have been difficult for you. I know you've lost things you believed you would always have. I know you're struggling in ways you never imagined. I'm not writing to gloat. I'm not writing to remind you of what happened. I'm writing to offer you an opportunity. The Hale Medical Foundation has opened a job placement program for individuals who need a fresh start. It offers resume building, interview coaching, and connections to companies looking to hire. If you're interested, you're welcome to apply. No special treatment. No favoritism. Just an opportunity to rebuild. I won't pretend to forgive what you did. I won't pretend that the years of cruelty and humiliation don't matter. But I also won't let your mistakes define the rest of your life. My mother taught me that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much grace you can show even when you have every reason not to. This is my grace. What you do with it is up to you. Neria. When Evelyn received the letter, She read it once, crumpled it up, and threw it across the room. She couldn't accept it. Accepting help from Neria would mean admitting she had been wrong. And Evelyn Ashford would rather starve than admit she had been wrong. Caleb read the letter and cried. He kept it folded in his wallet, carrying it with him every day, a reminder of the woman he had failed to protect and the mercy he didn't deserve. Miranda read it and immediately applied to the program. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge what she had done. But she took the opportunity because she had no other choice. Gregory never opened his letter. He left it sitting on the kitchen counter of the tiny apartment he was renting and disappeared. No one knew where he went. And Neria didn't follow up. She didn't check to see who accepted the offer. She didn't ask for updates. She had made the gesture. What they did with it was their responsibility, not hers. Because her mother had been right. The best way to defeat people who tried to destroy you wasn't to destroy them back. It was to rise so high, to become so good, so generous, so impossibly kind, that their cruelty looked pathetic in comparison. It was to build something so beautiful that their ugliness became irrelevant. And that's exactly what Neria did. She poured herself into the foundation. She funded hospitals in underserved communities. She created scholarships for children who looked like her, who came from nothing, who had been told they didn't matter. She built childcare centers for working mothers. She funded legal aid clinics for people who couldn't afford lawyers. She gave jobs to people who had been incarcerated and couldn't find work anywhere else. She became everything her mother had hoped she would be. Not bitter, not cruel, not vengeful, just powerful and kind and unstoppable. And years later, when people talked about the Hale Medical Foundation, they didn't talk about the Ashfords. They didn't talk about the lawsuit or the scandal or the courtroom drama. They talked about the woman who had inherited an empire and used it to change lives. They talked about Neria Hale, the girl who had been dismissed as worthless and became a force for good. The woman who proved that silence isn't weakness, that patience isn't surrendered, and that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming someone extraordinary. 5 years had passed since the courtroom judgment that changed everything. 5 years since Neria had stood in front of the world and announced her mother's legacy. 5 years since the Ashfords had lost everything they thought defined them. And in those 5 years, the world had moved on. The scandal that had dominated headlines for months eventually faded into memory. New stories replaced it. New dramas captured public attention. The Ashfords became a cautionary tale people referenced occasionally, but rarely thought about deeply. But Neria hadn't forgotten. Not because she held onto anger or bitterness, but because everything she built was a living reminder of where she had come from and what her mother had sacrificed to get her there. The Hale Medical Foundation had expanded beyond anything even her mother could have imagined. 23 hospitals now operated under its umbrella. The scholarship fund had sent over 2,000 students to college. The job training programs had helped 15,000 people find meaningful employment. Childcare centers had been built in 12 cities. Legal aid clinics served communities that had been ignored for decades. And at the center of it all was Neria, no longer the quiet, dismissed girl who had stood silently at her mother's funeral. She was confident now, powerful, but not in the way the Ashfords had been powerful. Not through cruelty or control. Through impact, through purpose, through the unwavering belief that the best way to honor her mother's memory was to become exactly what the world told them they could never be. Unstoppable. She stood now in her office, the same office her mother had never used, looking out over the city as the sun set. The skyline glowed orange and gold, and somewhere out there, millions of people were living their lives, unaware of the empire that had been built in silence 3 decades ago by a woman the world had dismissed as insignificant. Mr. Harrison knocked and entered, older now, his hair completely silver, but still sharp, still precise. "The final papers are ready," he said, placing a folder on her desk. Neria turned from the window. "The estate sale?" "Yes," Mr. Harrison confirmed. "The Ashford estate. The property has been on the market for 4 years. We finally have a buyer." Nerea sat down and opened the folder. The estate where she had spent 3 years of her life. The place where she had been humiliated daily. Where Evelyn had mocked her. Where Caleb had failed to protect her. Where every room held a memory of cruelty disguised as family. Who's buying it? Nerea asked. A tech entrepreneur, Mr. Harrison said. Young. Self-made. Wants to turn it into a retreat center for startup founders. Nerea smiled slightly. My mother would have liked that. Taking a symbol of old wealth and entitlement and turning it into something that helps people build their own futures. Indeed, Mr. Harrison said. He paused, then added quietly, there's something else. Caleb has requested to see you. Nerea looked up sharply. Caleb. He's been working at a community health clinic for the past 3 years, Mr. Harrison said. He completed the job training program you offered. He's a medical records coordinator now. Nothing glamorous. But he's shown up every day. He's been consistent. And he's asked multiple times over the years if he could speak with you. You've declined each time. But he's asked again. Nerea was quiet for a long moment. Why now? He says he has something to give you, Mr. Harrison said. Something your mother left for him before she died. Nerea's breath caught. My mother left something for Caleb? Apparently, Mr. Harrison said. He says she gave it to him years ago, before you were even married, with instructions to only give it to you if certain conditions were met. Nerea's mind raced. What conditions? He wouldn't say, Mr. Harrison said. He insists on giving it to you in person. Nerea stood and walked back to the window, her arms crossed. Every instinct told her to refuse, to maintain the boundary she had built, to keep Caleb in the past where he belonged. But curiosity gnawed at her. Her mother had always been 3 steps ahead. If she had left something with Caleb, it was deliberate, strategic, purposeful. All right, Nerea said finally. I'll see him. But here, in this office, on my terms. I'll arrange it, Mr. Harrison said. 2 days later, Caleb arrived at the Hale Medical Foundation headquarters. He looked different. Older, obviously, but also smaller somehow. The arrogance that had once surrounded him like armor was gone. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, nothing designer, nothing flashy. His hair was cut short and practical. He carried a worn leather bag over his shoulder. The receptionist escorted him to Nerea's office. When he entered, he stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes taking in the space. The massive desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the walls lined with photos of hospitals, scholarship recipients, community programs. This was power, real power, the kind his mother had always craved but never truly understood. Nerea sat behind her desk, her expression calm and unreadable. Hello, Caleb. Nerea, Caleb said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. You look incredible. Strong. Like you were always meant to be here. What do you want, Caleb? Nerea asked, her tone professional. Caleb walked forward slowly and set his bag on the chair in front of her desk. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm not here to apologize again, even though I am sorry. I'm here because your mother gave me something a long time ago, and she told me I could only give it to you when I had proven I understood what it meant to have nothing. Nerea's eyes narrowed. When did she give you this? 7 years ago, Caleb said. Before we were married. I ran into her at the hospital where she worked. I was there visiting someone, and I saw her cleaning a hallway. I didn't know who she was then. I just saw this woman working, and I stopped to talk to her. I don't know why. Maybe because she reminded me of someone. Maybe because she looked kind. He paused, his hands trembling slightly. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. And at the end of it, she handed me an envelope. She said, one day you're going to marry my daughter. And one day you're going to fail her. When you've lost everything and you finally understand what it means to be powerless, give this to her. Not before. Only when you've earned the right to deliver it. Nerea's heart pounded. She knew? She knew you would marry me. I don't know how, Caleb said. But she knew. And she was right. About all of it. He reached into his bag and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. He placed it on the desk in front of Neria. I've been carrying this for 7 years. And I've been working for 3 years to become someone worthy of delivering it. I'm still not sure I am. But I'm here. And I'm giving it to you now because I finally understand what she meant. Neria stared at the envelope. Her mother's handwriting was on the front. For Neria, when the boy becomes a man. She picked it up slowly, her hand shaking. You can leave now, Caleb. I know, Caleb said. But before I go, I need to say something. Not because I expect forgiveness. Not because I think it'll change anything. But because you deserve to hear it. Neria looked up at him. I was a coward, Caleb said, his voice breaking. I let my mother destroy you because I was too weak to stand up to her. I let you suffer because protecting you would have meant losing her approval. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. Tears ran down his face. But these past 3 years, working at the clinic, seeing people who have nothing fight every day just to survive, I finally understood what you and your mother lived through. I finally understood what real strength looks like. And it's not what my mother taught me. It's what your mother showed you. Endurance, patience, sacrifice. He wiped his eyes. You became everything I was too weak to be. And I'm so proud of you, even though I have no right to be. Neria's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. Thank you for bringing this. You can go now. Caleb nodded. He turned toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I've been attending therapy. I've been working on myself. Not because I think we'll ever be together again, but because I don't want to be the person I was. I don't want to be someone who stands by while people I love are destroyed. He looked back at her one last time. I hope you find happiness, Neria. Real happiness. The kind I was too broken to give you. And then he left. The door closed softly behind him. Neria sat alone in the silence, staring at the envelope. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling, and pulled out a handwritten letter. My dearest Neria, if you're reading this, it means Caleb has finally delivered it. It means he's lost everything. It means he's suffered. And it means, perhaps, that he's grown. I met him years before you did. I saw him at the hospital, young and arrogant, full of entitlement. And I knew, the moment I saw him, that he would cross your path. I don't know how I knew. Call it intuition. Call it a mother's fear. But I knew. And I knew he would fail you. So I gave him this letter with one instruction. Deliver it only when you've become someone worthy. I hope, by the time you read this, that he has. But whether he has or hasn't doesn't matter. What matters is this. You are free now. Free from him. Free from his family. Free from the weight of their cruelty. And I need you to do something for me. I need you to let go. Not of the lessons you learned. Not of the strength you built. But of the anger. Of the bitterness. Of the need to prove yourself to people who will never understand your worth. You've already won, baby. The moment you stood at my funeral and stayed silent while they mocked me, you won. Because you understood something they never will. That silence isn't a weakness. That patience isn't surrendered. And that the people who endure the longest are the ones who rise the highest. Now go live. Not for revenge. Not to prove anything. But for yourself. Build a life so beautiful, so full, so meaningful, that when you look back on this moment, you won't even remember their names. I love you forever, Mama. Neria read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in her desk drawer beside the first letter her mother had left her, and stood up. She walked to the window one last time, looking out over the city her mother had conquered in silence. And for the first time in 5 years, she felt it. Not victory, not vindication, but peace. She had honored her mother's memory. She had built something beautiful. She had proven that cruelty didn't define her. And now, finally, she could let go. She picked up her phone and called Mr. Harrison. Finalize the estate sale, she said, and draft a donation. I want to give $10 million to the community health clinic where Caleb works. Anonymous. No strings attached. Consider it done, Mr. Harrison said. Neria hung up and smiled. Not because Caleb deserved it, But because her mother had taught her that the best way to win wasn't to destroy your enemies. It was to become so good, so generous, so impossibly kind, that their cruelty became irrelevant. And that's exactly who Neria had become. She walked out of her office, leaving the past behind, and stepped into a future built not on revenge, but on purpose. A future her mother would have been proud of. A future where the girl who had been told she was nothing became everything. And the people who tried to break her were left with nothing but the memory of the woman they underestimated. The woman who rose in silence. The woman who won without saying a word. If you could rewrite your ending, would you choose revenge or peace? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling us the part of the story you enjoyed the most.